fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
On the topic of language, on the topic of information theory, which is something we're going to get to in the next couple episodes. We're still on our little science arc right now, and we're going to have many science arcs in the future, but we've been talking about quantum mechanics, we've been talking about a lot of things, scientific revolutions in the last episode. Now we're going to be talking, getting into information theory, which is a very complicated theory. It's very modern, it's very new, and there's still a lot of work being done on it, and it deals with a lot of ideas that really change the paradigm of how you look at the world. And it kind of has a lot to do with what we talked about last episode with Richard Dawkins. He's in this sort of milieu. But I wanted to talk about one of the foundational books on the topic. It's called The Human Use of Human Beings by Norbert Weiner. I'm going to say Weiner. It could be Weiner, but it is Weiner. Cybernetics and Society is the subtitle. Now, this is a book. It was published, I believe, in the 50s. Norbert Weiner was born in 1894, lived in 1964. This book was published, I think it was in the 1954. So this was a foundational book in cybernetics. In fact, this man, Norbert, is often said to have coined the term cybernetics. There's some debate about that. Some people say, it appeared, just on its own otherwise. But this is something he says as well. He says repeatedly in this book that he invented the word cybernetics. Whatever. Let's just go. This guy was kind of known to be a bit of a blowhard. Awesome. This was a guy who was...
Well, his name's Norbert.
Yeah. He's a big guy with the beard. And scientists rarely shit talk each other in public. But if you can read between the lines when they talk about this guy, it's like he was very driven and very vocal to us, and we he was a big loud asshole who was throwing his weight around, coming in like a wrecking ball, Miley Cyrus on his shoulders, fucking shit up, spilling fruit punch all over the place, got pockets full of shrimp, just digging it out, saying, "Do you want something?" Going, "Psych." Dropping it in his mouth, throwing it in his mouth. Is there anything worse than a man who throws a shrimp in his mouth? And look at that face of delight.
If I was going to picture the guy who invented cybernetics, this would be him. The guy who's psyching you on the shrimp in his fucking pocket.
If I was a scientist, this is how I would come into a room. Dick out, balls red, bin tannin. Guess what? I invented the robots that are going to rape your kids. Did I do that? Oh, Norbert, I hate that guy. I hate that guy who's making robots to rape my grandchildren. Coming in smelling like a sailor. Look, I got stuff to talk about. We're talking about the human use of human beings. So it deals with information theory, and it deals with the linking of man and machine. So that seems obvious to us now. Now, again, this was written in the 50s. A lot of what he's talking about will seem plainly obvious to people walking around right now, about the balance between the biological and the digital, about us. We talk about transhumanism all the time. We talk about the parallels between how humans operate, how machines operate, artificial intelligence, all this stuff that we talk about constantly. But for a while, this was new. And he was even talking about the implications of this. But also talks about why and how these implications happen. And that's what's so interesting, because the theory goes that, human beings, the way the human mind works, the brain, the synapses, and the neurobiology isn't altogether different than how a computer works. Again, seems obvious to us now, not just with the electrical overlap, but how we sort through information. And more importantly, that, and this is where some people start to disagree, but the idea that the human mind, not the human soul, but the human mind, isn't particularly special. And how it processes information and how it learns. Because we talk, there's lots of people in the news, they were talking about, this engineer who worked at Google accidentally created this advanced AI. And everyone says, that's impossible. We could never create an AI to mirror the human mind. And my response is, well, why not? It's not that complicated.
Yeah.
It's actually not to create that. We have, like we always mention, we got a chat bot in our chat. We laugh at it because it's stupid, but that's just because it's like a hobbyist thing. You could conceptually create artificial intelligence that processes information just as well as the human mind, because the way the human mind works isn't really that complicated.
Yeah.
So just to say some quotes from the book. So he essentially says, man and machine are parallel in their desire to control message entropy through feedback used for physical performance. That's basically what it means. So a lot of what we think about with the human mind, as you're going about the world, it's just like, what is learning? What is memory? What is processing information? A lot of it is that the human body just has a lot of sensors. We can call them sensors: sight, smell, touch. You could feel your body. You can feel your presence in the world. That's important. What we do is we try and transmit information. Our bodies, our cells, on a biological level, even the atoms within our body, they're communicating to each other constantly. They're sending signals. Your body is telling itself what to do automatically. Of course, everyone knows this, but we have to say, oh, these are messages being sent. And when we talked about, I won't get into Richard Dawkins because we covered that last episode, but the idea is that everything in human life, including biology, is about message transfer. One thing telling another thing what to do. And in information theory, which we'll get to maybe in the next episode, the biggest thing that humans and machines are trying to do is make sure messages are passed between itself and each other perfectly, making so a message is sent on node A and received on node B perfectly. Information theory dictates, and in this book dictates, that the process between going from A to B of sending the message is where you encounter entropy. This is where messages get lost. Messages are misinterpreted. Messages break down. And this is where you get into how you craft the proper message so it doesn't break down by the time it's received. Now, how does a message break down? I'll give you a couple examples. Let's even use a person talking to another person. There's a lot of ways a message can break down. They cannot hear you correctly, so you try and say it louder. You're not clear in the way you describe it. You need to make it so you have a message in your mind, something you want to communicate. Maybe it's warning them about fire, right? How do you communicate that there's a fire there? Well, you have to pick a word. Fire. Okay. You can't just say it. You got to yell it. You got to yell it to them, and you got to yell it at a specific speed so that it flies through the air, is caught by his brain, and is interpreted to mean what it says. Now, the more complicated and nuanced the message, the more difficult this is. This is why choosing language is very, very, we have to be specific about the language we do. And we can't, can the message be long or short? The longer some might think that the shorter the message, the better. Not always, because a short message can also be misinterpreted. But the longer the message, the more it can kind of break down in transit. So now you start to see how information transfer is important. Now, even as the body breaks down with age, information transfer is being affected. Things are being processed slower. You can't get the messages between your blood cells telling you how to carry toxins out. We experience entropy. I won't get too much into entropy on this because there's a lot. We'll talk about that later, but just explain what entropy is now. When we talk about entropy, a lot of people kind of know what that means. They know, entropy means like chaos. It means breakdown. It means death and disintegration. Entropy is chaos taking over in a way. That's sort of how it's used in popular culture. What entropy means is just kind of confusion, and on a scientific level, entropy means the useful energy and information isn't there anymore. It's just stuff. It can't be interpreted anyway, right? So it'd be the difference between a message and just noise you're making.
We can certainly create small local reversals of this trend of decay and increase in entropy. Life itself is an example of that. All biological life works and exists because it's able to take energy released from complex systems and use it to drive its own synthesis. So life is itself a temporary victory. But at the level of the universe, everything that exists or has existed will be utterly lost.
Entropy means by the time you say something but it gets to the person, it's just it's just noises, it's just garbled nonsense. What is this? That's kind of what entropy is. It means that there's matter or information, but it's not useful in any way. And that's kind of, if you think of entropy was invented, not invented, but discovered as an element of thermodynamics. So let's say you take something hot and you put in some cold water, and then you get steam, you get bubbling, you get this reaction happening. And that's essentially entropy. Entropy is the creation of this new type of energy, creating steam, right? Eventually, they'll balance out. The temperature will balance out. There's no reaction. There's still stuff in there. There's still atoms in there, but there's no reaction. There's no energy being produced. So it's just this stuff. That's what entropy is. Entropy is the measure of the uselessness of energy that's being created. So in information theory, you could say entropy is like the breakdown of the message compared to like the sounds and the stuff you're doing. Because you're introducing things, but they don't actually carry a message. That's kind of what it means. And he says a machine is like a human in the sense that it is an entity that locally and temporarily combats increasing entropy. Because the idea is entropy is always happening, just like, the hot item going into the water and creating steam. It's always on a path towards death, and we're trying to stop that as much as possible. We're trying to create ways to keep entropy away. So we create more precise languages. That's what the human body is. Like, we're always fighting entropy. Our body is always trying to break down the breakdown. We're trying to prevent the breakdown. That's what the DNA does. It's always trying to recycle. Eventually it loses, but the idea that we're temporarily fighting against entropy with our very existence, that's relevant. And that's what communicating a message is. Like, you're trying to figure out a way that entropy doesn't win over this thing you're trying to communicate. And a communication, we're using language as an example. This is also sending a fucking message in a machine to open this valve or close that valve, or like close this valve if this valve is open. And you can see how, you're into automation, you're into all this stuff. You know how these automation networks work. A message being communicated can be anything. It could be just any sort of direction within a system telling this to do that in this precise order. And we're trying to create systems that make it so it's as accurate as possible at all times. And that's one way to look at life. That's one way to look at all forms of communication. And that's what, the height of this would just be telekinesis, literally implanting your thought into someone else's head. That would be the ideal goal. That would be like the quantum entanglement. The moment something happens, it triggers something immediately. But we can't do that. We have to have this in between, and it's the in between we're trying to control. So just to kind of establish the paradigm that we're dealing with here, we'll get into information theory, like I said, next episode, because we can unpack this even more and more and go deeper into this, and we will, and it's pretty interesting. But just to keep it in the relationship between machines and man and what this means. So cybernetics, in that sense, is the study of messages delivered between people and machines and how to reduce entropy in transit. And that's what that is. So there's a page here I wanted to read. He's just got this line here that kind of sets it up. He says, "What many of us fail to realize is that the last 400 years are a highly special period in the history of the world. The pace at which changes during these years have taken place is unexampled in earlier history, as is the very nature of these changes. This is partly the result of increased communication, but also of an increased mastery over nature, which, on a limited planet like Earth, may prove in the long run to be an increased slavery to nature. For the more we get out of this world, the less we leave. And in the long run, we shall have to pay the debts at a time that may be very inconvenient to our own survival. We are the slaves of our technical improvement, and we can no more return to a New Hampshire farm to the self-contained state in which it was maintained in 1800 than we can by taking thought, add a cubit to our stature, or we have modified our environment so radically that we must now modify ourselves in order to exist in this new environment. We can no longer live in the old one. Progress imposes not only new possibilities for the future, but new restrictions." So as he's writing this, he's taking it from the angle that we would take, where it's like, look, we've inexorably change things forever, and we need to figure out how we're going to live in this new world, and kind of trying to outline the relationship that we are having, which has been borne out by time.
Right.
That is the world we're living in right now. So I guess he was vindicated. Some people looked at this like, this guy, he's saying it's going to get bad. It got bad. It got way worse than you thought it would.
Unfortunately. And
he said he makes it practical in the book. He says a healthy society rests on the integrity of its internal communications, and these communications are distorted by time and errors. So he says that all communications should be automated for clarity and to better combat natural entropy. And he's saying this, like, if we believe that everything he said up there is true, and maybe if you don't believe it, that's one thing. But if everything up until now is true, then we have to, the best way to combat entropy is to actually take it out of the hands of people.
Yeah.
In a sense, which I don't, like, instinctually, I don't agree with that. Instinctually, I say that's bad. But the logic follows for me. He says here, this book argues that the integrity of the channels of internal communications is essential to the welfare of the society. Blah, blah, blah. 150 years ago, or even 50 years ago, it does not matter which, the world, and America in particular, were full of small journals and presses through which almost any man could obtain a hearing. He goes on for a while here, actually. I don't know why he's quoted this one. Yeah, I'm not going to... It goes on for like 5 pages. I'm not going to quote that. Basically, he's just saying that put machines in charge of everything because we're not very good at combating entropy with our way of doing things. Now, on the topic of how machines and humans think similarly, we talked about this on a previous episode about Boston Dynamics. So Boston Dynamics, they create these robots that everyone's probably seen, those creepy looking 4-legged automaton things that are seemingly devised just to hunt down people, hunt down you.
Yeah.
Well, the reason they did this is because they've been working on artificial intelligence for a long time, and they realized that they hit a ceiling on that, and that so much of how humans think is informed by our corporeal presence in the world. It's based on the fact that we can see and hear and touch, and we can see our location relative to everything else, and we have more sensors, basically. So if a mind is just in a computer, it loses so many outputs, it actually can't think like a person anymore. To describe what a sky is without standing beneath the sky is very, very difficult. You need real world experience to grasp a lot of these concepts, which are so integral to our society, to our civilization, to our nature. Like, you got to be here. That's why it's such a big deal when you lose one of these senses. But he says that's essentially, if you just give them a body and increase the amount of sensors, you could get something close to a person. And he described, like, what is learning? We talk about a learning machine. What is learning? Well, it's just, if you think about it, it's just feedback. And this is how we devise Roombas. You look at a Roomba, like, oh, that's a dumb thing. Not really. It's a learning machine. It says, I did this, I hit something, I'm going to remember. That's a feedback that I got, so I'm going to keep that feedback in mind and not do that. Now, that seems very simple to the task we gave it. But if you look at the human machine, the human being, a lot of what we are is just memory of feedback. This is what we teach kids. They have to do something, they get their hands slapped, and you don't do it again. That's all it is. And we just stack that more and more and more. By the time you're in your 30s or 40s, you just have like insane memories of the various feedbacks you got, not just on what to avoid, but how to engage with other people, how to make money, how not to lose money, things like that. It's just trial and error, and we do it on such a scale, but we keep a record of it. And so the idea is, could you introduce enough similar sensors to a machine, and it's just recording feedback, and that's what learning is, accumulated feedback in memory. Could that happen? Yeah, why couldn't it? We did it for a thing that vacuums your fucking floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise it would just hit the same wall again and again, but it doesn't. And it seems to get better. These chatbots get better and smarter, and they do it a bit inelegantly, but that's because they're for free. These are just like little fucking tchotchkes and toys.
Yeah,
You're having a conversation with a toy. Like the logic dictates that there's nothing that's that special about the human mind that we could not replicate.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to get into the soul and stuff, that's another thing. But sorry, continue.
No, I just wanted to point out it's kind of joke, right? Because in all the Telegram chats lately, everybody's been posting these DALL-E Minibot memes, right? Which are hilarious because they look like shit. But like you just said, those memes look like shit because it's a free AI, like a browser-based AI, that is developing these in, 20 or 30 seconds. The actual DALL-E 2 bot produces stuff that is better than corporate artists. It's actually used by corporations to produce corporate art. They are using it, and they have been for over a year. This is actually... I don't know how many of the guys follow this. Maybe Haddock does, but like, this has been going on for a while. This has been going on for at least 5 or 6 years, and it's for copywriting as well. Companies are already using this shit, and the joke is, you don't know when you're looking at it. You're looking at a title card in a news article, like an illustration. It was not made by a person. It was made by DALL-E 2. Because why would you pay an illustrator $1,200? And this is the point, right? The same thing with copywriting. It isn't made by a person. We're not trying to ascribe a soul to the creature or the machine that made that piece of art. But the point is, you can't tell it was made by a person or not, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, on one hand, they'll say, I can never converse with an AI because I can tell it's not human. I'm trying not to sound too mean here because we were kind of joking about this in the chat. Have you talked to most normal people? Like, there's not a thought in their fucking head some of the time. Like, I'm more impressed by some of this broken AI than some of these fucking retards I talk to on a day.
To dig into it just a little, like, I said this only half jokingly a few times in the chat and talking to other people, even in the staff chat, joking about it. It's like sometimes I feel like I'm talking to a bunch of chat bots. But really, and part of it is that people are dumb, but the other part of it is the nature of conversation, especially if you're talking to multiple people. Things can be misinterpreted. If you read something and it seems idiosyncratic or odd, or you don't really get the spacing of their word or the syntax or the way that they wrote that, then you can say, oh, it's because that person is a robot. But if you don't expect that, it's like you were talking about last time about paradigms, right? If you're not looking for an error, right, and you're trying to interpret it, you're trying to fit that response into the mold of this response came from a person, then you're going to say, well, maybe they just said that because they're typing too fast. Maybe they said that because they're having a bad day. Maybe they said that because their English is a second language to them, right? But the reality is, the reason they said that is because they're a fucking robot. They're not a person.
Yeah. Well, and here's an interesting thing to say. So AI, the very advanced AI, I believe, could replicate very precise and concise English. Let's use English. But for someone to seem like a real person, it's not really about accuracy, because people will go out of their way to break the language that they're using.
Right. So
for humans to communicate really in a one-to-one way, they almost type shitty on purpose, or they make up new slang on the go. So really the wall that the AI hits is that it is incapable of breaking the rules in such a unique way that people can. However, some people just don't do that. Some people just try and write like a robot, write like a chatbot. They're indistinguishable. Only the internet weirdos will have to try and stay ahead of it by always inventing new ways to break the conversation that we're using to signal that we're real people. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's such a strange adaptation that we have, because the idea is that ideally we're communicating in a way that it can be interpreted the same by everyone, but we're going in the exact opposite direction culturally and socially. I don't know what to do with that information. It's just something, as you were saying that, it occurred to me. I wanted to get it out there.
For real.
Because that is anti-feedback. Because what is feedback? Feedback is just the process of controlling a system by reinserting the results of past performance. That's all it is, right? So it's just, I remember this happened last time. I'm using it to inform my actions now. Any robot can do that. But we're trying to almost break that system itself to try and reclaim some humanity, maybe even subconsciously. I'm willing to bet subconscious. I don't think people are doing this on purpose. And also, like, just to that point, once you drill down into just the biology of it, like if you look at human synapses, He makes this claim in the book. He says, once you drill down into how they actually work, it's a lot like an all or nothing yes-no machine that makes human decisions. If you look at how energy and information passes in the neural pathways, it's like these junctions of circuits. And it's, everyone says, oh, if you look at the human brain, it's like a circuit board. It's like, okay, but what does that mean? Because you probably don't know what a circuit board is. You probably don't know what a brain is. But how it functions is sort of a binary yes, no, if, then statement. Just a lot of it layered and layered and layered and passing information. So that's where he gets the idea that this human brain is like a computer. Now, the human mind, I'm still leaving open, the human mind can be something special. There's art. Maybe we have an answer for the soul. I'm putting that to the side for now. So I'm not trying to say that this is not a transhumanism argument. This is not saying that we are indistinguishable from robots and AI, because we are, and we know we are. But I'm trying to. This just seems like good data to me. This just seems like this guy was right about this in the 50s. So I think we should listen to correct people.
I think it's like,
call me old-fashioned or don't.
There's the one hand of it is. Are robots people? Can AI be sentient? Can it have a soul? And then the other part of it is, do I need to worry about robots sneaking up on me? It's like you don't have to solve the first argument to be worried about the second one. The answer to the second one is yes, you do have to be worried about robots sneaking up on you, about them killing you, about them tricking you, about them taking your job, about them stealing your family, about doing all kinds of shit. They're going to do it. That doesn't mean they have a soul. That's kind of like saying, do guns have souls? Do I need to be worried about people with guns? You should be worried about people with guns, but that's not because guns are magic. That's because they're tools, right? And likewise with AI. AI is already to what I'm saying is AI is already to a point where you daily interact with the AI and you don't even know you're doing it. It already is in many appreciable, significant ways. It is smarter than you. It knows more than you. It is more powerful than you. It is stronger than you. It is beating you daily, and you're not even fucking noticing because you're weak comparatively. That doesn't mean it's alive, but it is dangerous. So.
It is, and here's another way to help people wrap their head around it. And all this stuff was being discussed by Darwin as well. A lot of this stuff was being discussed by philosophers. So this isn't just a cybernetic, a technological thing. These questions go back to, even if you're talking about we're creating a golem or something, like something that has no soul and yet exists. We've told these stories since time immemorial. Yes. So it's not like we've been dealing with this. So the idea was like, you can design a machine that through learning can avoid certain pitfalls through feedback. We can teach, we create a random machine. And this was an experiment they did. We're going to make a machine do just random stuff and kind of code in things it can't do. On a long enough timeline, they say, it will, just by process of feedback and process of elimination, start to search for something like a purpose. This is natural to any system that you just let run. You're telling me what not to do, by the process. Logically, that means that there is, if there's something I'm not supposed to do, it implies that there's something I'm supposed to do. I don't know what that is yet. Even without a soul or a mind, it will seek out some kind of purpose to give itself form, if it is indeed a random machine. And there is no reason to believe that if you were to leave a sort of a hypothetical, random, chaotic machine untethered, that it wouldn't over time develop like a purpose in life, like a reason for its functioning.
Yeah.
Right. Just by process of elimination. So there's no and he says it here. It's like he talks with this one researcher named Ashby, but I'm not going to go with them. But I believe that Ashby's brilliant idea of the unpurposeful random mechanism which seeks for its own purpose through a process of learning is not only one of great philosophical contributions of the present day, but will lead to highly useful technical developments in the task of automation. Not only can we build purpose into machines, but in an overwhelming majority of cases, a machine designed to avoid certain pitfalls of breakdown will look for purpose which it can fulfill. Darwin's influence on the idea of progress was not confined to the biological world, even in the 19th century. All philosophers and all sociologists draw their scientific ideas from the sources available at the time. Thus, it is not surprising to find Marx and his contemporary socialists accepted a Darwinian point of view in the matter of evolution and progress. In physics, the idea of progress opposes that of entropy, although there is no absolute contradiction between the two. So I'll just stop there. Basically, what he's saying is, life itself is fighting entropy, and life kind of needs a progress and direction to fight entropy. And if you give a machine, just give it the direction of avoiding breakdown and avoiding death, it will try and find a direction. So that is again a philosophical, almost social thing, and this has been talking about again since time immemorial. But I think it bears repeating, and it bears investigation, even for people kind of from our side. And he mentions in the book, what makes humans unique, and this we can talk to this. Maybe here's where we kind of find the soul and the spirit of the people. So he says what separates us from animals, and we talked about this on the previous episode, but animals and also machines is the complexity of our messages. So, for example, we have the tone. There's like 3 meanings involved in a message that we deliver. So there is the kind of tonal audio one, which is just a noise you make. Like communicating with drums and everything. That is one. The second is the actual message. That's the language. So you've got sounds, mean something. Then there's the language carried on the sounds. That delivers a message. However, there's also a contextual meaning, that a semantic meaning in there, which is you can say one thing but mean another. Machines can't do that. The idea that how fucking weird is it that we can have double talk? That's weird. Thinking that sarcasm is fucking weird, isn't it? That you can literally say something, but everyone knows you mean the opposite.
Yeah, but I don't want to go on a tangent here, but you could view sarcasm as a Chinese box from the perspective of a robot, right? Like the robot could treat sarcasm like a Chinese box, where if you want to say the opposite, quote unquote, the opposite is the thing that you say. That's the card that you plug into the machine, and then that's what comes out of your mouth. And a human interprets it as sarcasm, but you actually said exactly what you meant, right? So, because remember, it doesn't have a soul. It's just fulfilling a purpose. So if the only way to achieve the purpose is sarcasm, it's going to learn how to do sarcasm. And
it'll figure out how to do something. Yeah, and that's what's interesting. I just like the idea of sort of meaning within meaning, right? Because if you look at it almost from a fractal point of view, that we can have a message and then a secret message coded within that message, which is a lot of what he said here led to encryption and led to, this would have been, shortly after World War II, but this is what Alan Turing was dealing with too. The idea of embedding information within other information. Because once you start thinking this way, you're like, okay, how much information within information can I make? Like the human beings communicating with each other rely on this sort of contextual, what do I call it? I want to say water table, the contextual water table. But us having this sort of hidden semantic language wouldn't work if you're communicating with a Japanese person, with an Arab person. So and this is where you get into the cultural and civilizational stuff, that there's certain, winks and nudges that are in the Indian culture that would not be apparent if they're speaking to a white person. So that within there, you start to see, okay, there is a collective spirit thing here going on. I'm just kind of playing in these waters of trying to say the nature and the complexity and the semantic meaning of the messages within messages can maybe within that we find something that is uniquely human, just as an example.
Yeah.
And then maybe robots try and make it some analog of that in the future. But that's interesting. The idea of meanings within meanings, that is, once you really look at that, you're like, it's weird that we do that.
Yeah. No, I see what
it's weird. It's weird that we don't just get more specific, we get less specific, but make it so that only a certain type of person could pick up on it.
Yeah.
And then you apply that to military communications if you want to. But
yeah.
What I was saying was the phonetic level, semantic level, and behavioral level. That's what I should have said. I might have gotten those names wrong. Phonetic, behavioral, semantic. Okay, yeah, that's what it is. And this is backed up by what he calls within the human brain, just to give some science to this. Within the brain, within the synapses, there's something called the internuncial pool, internuncial, internuncial pool. It's a pool of neurons in the brain that's just for larger assemblies, investigation, and abstract semantic interpretation. So there is a part of your brain that is there just for this. It's trying to work with abstract stuff and find the ideas within ideas. It translates not word for word, but idea for idea, more abstractly. And this is what we'll get into information theory about. Are ideas just words? No, not really. There are ideas that are embedded within the language, and there's a part of your brain that kind of separates it from the word and plays around with concepts and ideas divorced from language. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how you can communicate ideas in different ways to different people. And once they get that, like, oh, now I can work with it in my brain. That's the mechanics of what's going on when we try and kind of explain these ideas. The good news is that the likelihood of this AI just becoming untethered and unchained and running on its own is unlikely, because we have complete control of where we put the AI. So if we keep the AI on a computer, it's not going to do much. If we put it's impossible to create a human AI in the body of a dog as well, right? So the problem is the boundaries that are on AI naturally are so great that to make a AI that thinks like a human, you need to put it in as close to a human body as possible. And then even then you hit limits. This is what science fiction is all about. Like, what if we put AI this is Star Trek. You put it in as close to a human AI, human body as possible, but there's still limitations, which means it can't get there all the way. That's Data from Star Trek Next Generation. That's the idea. Like, I still can't speak to you one-on-one. There's something there because there's just that little bit of barrier that his sensors are wrong in a little way. He can't feel the same way. He doesn't have the exact same experience of being born, of accumulating knowledge as a baby. And because of that, he'll always be separate, right? And he'll always be distrusted, and maybe correctly so. So just to let people know, if they're afraid of AI, there's intense limitations on what AI could do. Not to say we should ignore it or that there won't be some black swan crazy fucking event that changes everything. I do not underestimate the ability of scientists to fuck everything up and get us killed. However, let's not get excited every time they say we made a human that can sound like a human. I'm like, well, first, most humans are retards. Second of all, what does that mean? Third of all, we're pretty good at finding ways to reveal the inhumanity in inhuman things. And we were good at doing this before when we were afraid of demons and witches. We'll figure out a way to test this this android by dipping it in the fucking lake. We did it for women. We can do it for monsters too. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was trying to get at. That's all. We're kind of running long here, because some of the stuff in here we're going to get to in the next episode about information theory, about fighting the idea of information itself as an organism trying to fight off entropy by propagation, by trying to revive itself constantly. The ways this is where we get into the Dawkins thing, but it constantly tries to reconstitute itself. And this idea of homeostasis, that we are just an information processing system. And we're like a homeostasis is like we're a pattern that's always reconstituting itself by pulling in outside resources like a whirlpool. That's why we eat and we drink and we fuck and we fight and everything, because that's what DNA is always recycling itself again and again. And on a biological level, we're always kind of like trying to reintegrate ourselves into ourselves as the message is trying to fight off the natural decay that is the universe. The universe is decay. And that's the theory behind dark matter, by the way. And this is very, very speculative, but the idea of dark matter being that if we look at how the galaxies are flying apart, their speed at which they're flying apart is increasing, which goes against Einstein's theory of relativity and theory of gravity, that there's so much gravity in the universe, it should be collapsing in on itself. What is causing it to not only spread apart, but spread apart faster? Well, the idea is that there's all this extra matter in the universe that we can't see. And the idea is maybe that's just entropy. That's just that things burn out, the energy goes, and what's left over, there's still atoms. There's still matter. There's stuff. The stuff doesn't go away, but we've just got all this dead stuff.
Yeah.
Just the corpse matter of the universe itself. And that is taking up more and more and more space as energy kind of converts into, you burn something, you still have just the coal and the shit around there. Anyway, I'm getting off into a tangent here, but that's kind of what it is. Like, entropy eventually wins. And the form entropy takes is just inert dead matter, and in one way that's what a corpse is. Like you're still there, your body is still there, but something has left you. The energy has left you. The energy is expended. Where does that energy go? Well, we can speculate all day about that. We're not doing that in this episode. This is just about the synergy between those two, and the idea of entropy itself, which I think is really at the core of what we're talking, and how once we realize ourselves as the things we do and say are trying to fight off the concept of entropy, which is degradation, miscommunication, death, destruction, chaos. That's an interesting way to look at the world and why it is we're here and why it is we do the things we do. Now, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Every time.
Well, I should also say, like, hey, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I should see it coming, but no. I mean, it's true. I agree.
It says, what it does is it really says a lot in a lot of ways about society.
Yeah.
In regards to society, this in a way says a lot.
Yes, because that's where we live, right? We live in a society, so.
It's a very difficult situation. It's very, in a lot of ways, it's complex.
Yeah.
And you're thinking I think it's one way, but sometimes it's another way. And for us, we're just stuck on this crazy blue marble.
Yeah, that's right. And people don't think it be like that, but it do. So.
But sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And it's up to us to really keep an eye on things.
Was that the fucking Japanese guy the other day? The fucking... well, we got to keep an eye on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Francis Fukuyama.
Yeah.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.